Hey everybody, so Dream Theater just released the song Night Terror, which is their first new recording to be released since Mike Portnoy rejoined the band. We'll talk about all that and more, but first I want to let you know that my Patreon is patreon.com/JordanOwen42. I'm hoping to raise funds to deal with some financial difficulties I'm going through right now, but I don't have any illusions about being a full-time bread tuber. I'd ideally like to get to about $800 to $1,000 a month, just so I can deal with the stuff I'm dealing with right now and kind of pad things out a little bit for future developments. But anyway, if you're so interested in contributing and being a part of that, it's patreon.com/JordanOwen42. I'm uploading new music, new songs, new video essays as things go get rolling. So if you'd like to be a part of that, I'd really appreciate it, and you'll get to see all of that content before it gets out to the regular viewers. So anyway, getting back to this wonderful new development. So first of all, talk about the song itself. It was like, they say it was like when Walter Becker and Donald Fagen stopped working together for an extended period of time as Steely Dan, and when they got back together, people around them said it just flowed together naturally, like they just picked right back up where they had been, and it was as if nothing had changed between them and everything. And that's very much the same vibe I got off of this recording. Like, when I sat down, listened to Night Terror, to the music video, I instantly was back to Black Clouds and Silver Linings, which of course was Portnoy's last album with the band before his extended hiatus, what we thought was going to be a permanent replacement. And we entered the Mangini era. But anyway, so it took me right back to that. Like, sonically, it was right back there in that dark, symphonic, gothic kind of mode that they had adopted for Black Clouds and Silver Linings. And Dream Theater, properly functioning, always, each album has kind of its own sonic world that it occupies. Every album feels like it feels like a novel unto itself, where it's like, it's a different story every time. You can tell all the hallmarks of the writer that you're reading are there, but it's a different story every time. It's a different world that you occupy. And that's very much what you get with Dream Theater. You think about the thematic, conceptual, sonic, and production differences between Images and Words, Awake, and Falling into Infinity are just, it's extraordinary to think that that's the same band on all three of those albums, because they're in such different worlds and different places. Most bands hit on something and hit on a sound they occupy in their first hit single, and then they just grind that into the ground until people are sick of it, And Dream Theater has always evolved, and so it was so fulfilling to hear this sound that just felt like the natural next step from Black Clouds and Silver Linings. Because honestly, guys, the thing for me is that there's the Mangini era had some great music in it, and I've alluded to this before, but if you're just joining this, I knew Mike Mangini when I was at Berkeley. I don't think he'd remember me now, but I knew him at Berkeley, and I truly had tears in my eyes when I saw the video of him being invited to join Dream Theater. He was absolutely the right person, the right man for the job. Out of the 7 people that auditioned, he was easily the best fit. Second, or nearly matched by Peter Wildoer. If they hadn't gone with Mangini, I would have said go with Peter Wildoer. But Mangini was such a natural and such an understandable fit for Dream Theater. And I saw them live with Mangini on the last tour they did with him, and sounded great, played great. Uh, but at the same time, we cannot deny how responsible Mike was for the conceptual aspects of Dream Theater. You know, he was the leader of the band, and he's acknowledged that. You know, it's funny. He's acknowledged that in interviews since he's come back that, like, well, it's been a decade plus since I was in the band, and they're a different, you know, they're working differently now. I have to see what they want, and then apparently they were just very much like, no, steer the ship again. We brought back, they wanted everything and that he had to offer back. And Mike is the one that's always been, Portnoy is the one that's always been conscious of the band having these different eras, these very tangible differences in their sound. And so that stopped, I think, when they got Mangini in the band. Mangini, although a full-time member, was, I think, understandably, probably playing his cards as, like, this is their thing, I'm a guest in their home, that kind of thing. And so it didn't have, the virtuosity was there, undeniably, but it just didn't have that thing where each album was extremely distinct in its sound. It just sounded like, as much as I enjoyed different songs and everything, it felt so phoned in. It's like, we're gonna be Dream Theater now. We have to go sound like Dream Theater now. At first, when Dramatic Turn of Events came out, I heard that and I was blown away by it, because it went back to the images and words sound, which is very understandable. It went back to it to such a degree that people were actually drawing, like, point by point comparisons between the songs, and saying, well, this song is clearly derived from this song, and that kind of thing. To such a degree that Dream Theater even stepped up and denied that that's what they were doing. And so that album, impressive album, really enjoyed it. Dream Theater, self-titled, I think was the best of the Mangini era. I liked The Astonishing a lot, but it is now, I think, universally, it's kind of, it's just the most poorly regarded of all the albums among the fans. I think probably not because it's a concept album, God knows Dream Theater fans would love that, but because the concept is kind of at the level of, like, YA fiction, it's not as deep or cerebral as what you hear on Awake or Scenes from a Memory and stuff like that. Anyway, and to be honest, again, Distance Over Time, View from the Top of the World, I've listened to both of those albums one time each. Like, understand, Rush is my all-time favorite band, but Dream Theater only comes in second at a photo finish. I mean, like, they're definitely my favorite band that's still performing, still touring, still existing. They are the band that they defined my world to such an extent that it was reading about Dream Theater that made me decide where I wanted to go to college, that kind of thing. So as the Mangini era wore on, it just wasn't the same anymore. Meanwhile, Mike Portnoy is out there doing all kinds of, all this great stuff. He's playing with Neil Morse, he's playing with Transatlantic and Flying Colors and Winery Dogs and all this cool stuff. And it's like you're realizing where the nexus of energy and creativity is that's lacking in these last couple of albums. And so getting him back, it feels like he never left. Like, it just restores a part of my heart. And I know I said all of this back when he initially rejoined or things like it. But hearing this album, or this song, I'm excited for Parasomnia, for the album. Hearing this song captured, just captured my imagination, took me, like I said, right back to Black Clouds and Silver Linings, which was a phenomenal album. And the playing, it was people, it's so funny. One of the things that grates on my nerves is the how perpetually ungrateful some people in the Dream Theater camp are, the fandom camp are. Like, I'm hearing, I go on the forums and I'm seeing things like, it's just more typical Dream Theater. It's just the Mangini era with Portnoy back and all of this belly aching and this constant complaining. And it's like, stop a minute. For the people that say it sounds predictably like what Dream Theater would sound like, first of all, no shit, motherfucker. Second of all, you know full well this is an unwinnable argument, because if they went in the opposite direction, they have two options here, basically. One, make an album that sounds like classic Dream Theater. Two, do something that sounds nothing like classic Dream Theater, completely throw caution to the wind and go in a whole other direction, and not only piss people off, but potentially alienate endless more numbers of fans after that, be above and beyond that. I mean, my God, did Joker Folie à Deux teach us nothing? After a certain point, you have to stop and think, okay, what is the product that we are in the business of delivering? And in this case, it's, what did Portnoy era Dream Theater sound like? Yes, I want to go exactly back to this. This is exactly what I wanted. Sonically, production-wise, it sounds perfect, as you can imagine. James LaBrie's voice sounds great on this. And I'll tell you, James LaBrie gets a bum rap. He really does. Like, the first time I saw them live was on the Dream Theater Queensryche Fates Warning tour during the 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence cycle, and people were already well into the James LaBrie sucks live thing at that point. And they opened with Metropolis Part 1, and James comes out singing, his voice sounding clear as a bell. This was, years after the food poisoning incident that tore up his throat and everything. He comes out sounding clear as a bell, sounding great. On the, I must admit I'm so afraid line, he hit it and he held it the entire time perfectly. I mean, it just sounded phenomenal. He sounded better than Jeff Tate that night. And so, great. I mean, he sounded great. And so I have always thought that people are completely unfair to him, even in the Dream Theater camp. And it's weird because people will say, yeah, he sounds like Michael Sweet from Stryper, who is also an amazing vocalist. Where do people get off with these comparisons? Like, God. Anyway, it's like, it reminds me of a time somebody on a forum was trying to cut me down about my music, and he said, your songs sound like Creed, Meatloaf, and Nickelback. And I just said, yeah, keep comparing me to the most successful rock musicians in history. This is really humbling me. I mean, it's just weird. It's just bizarre. Like I said, there's people in the metal world, the heavy metal fandom at large, who think that the only thing you're supposed to aspire to do as a heavy metal artist is play to 5 guys in battle jackets at a backyard barbecue. That's it. That's as big as you should ever want to play to. Your vocalist should do nothing but pig squeals on the sounds of a stuck kitchen disposal, and the entire band should sound like a washing machine that's gone off its spin cycle. And you're supposed to play, again, 5 guys in battle jackets that are all standing there like that. And that's all. That's the most you're ever supposed to aspire to in metal. It's like, fuck, God, just get over yourself. Anyway, so LaBrie sounded great on this. Powerhouse vocals, and to hear him harmonizing with Mike again was just, yes, perfect. One thing I always love is when bands have multiple singers, so that it, not just the lead singer. That way, when they record the harmonies, it doesn't just sound like a cascade of the, like a room full of the lead singer singing, clones of the lead singer singing together. It sounds like, an actual ensemble. It's like one of the reasons the Beatles sound so great is because they have 4 very distinct voices that could sing together in harmony. It's things like that. That was perfect. And the song itself, beautifully played. We would expect nothing less from Dream Theater. But yeah, for real, guys, get over the idea that you're upset because it sounds like something other than classic Dream Theater. Like, my God, you know full well if they pulled a Saint Anger or a Lulu, this would be the end for them. God, yeah. Anyway, and I like Lulu, by the way. That's a whole other discussion. Saint Anger's nah. But anyway. So then the other thing I wanted to address is all of, I follow multiple Dream Theater forums on the Facebook pages and everything. And my God, people, y'all have like 3 things that you talk about. And one of those things is people constantly going, do you think the new album is going to be Metropolis Part 3? I think it's going to be Metropolis Part 3. Wouldn't it be neat if it was Metropolis Part 3 and they got Kevin Moore back in the band? You think they'll get Kevin Moore back in the band? I hope they get Kevin Moore back in the band. Okay, first of all, Kevin Moore's never coming back to Dream Theater. He is a licensed professional therapist and has living his best life outside of music. He has zero interest in returning to music, zero interest in returning to Dream Theater. Just fucking accept it. Oh, God. Anyway, but let me tell you something. They're never going to do Metropolis Part 3. Or if they do, we'll know that they're getting really desperate. Because... Let's stop and think about how Metropolis Part 2 came about. Now, understand, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory, is my favorite album of all time. Number 1 of all time. And let's talk about how that came about. So, on Images and Words, they did a song called Metropolis Part 1, and they put the Part 1 on there, not planning to do an ongoing series of a multi-part epic of songs or anything, but simply because they wanted to do a wink and a nod to the classic prog albums they'd grown up with, where everything was part this, that, and the other. So it begins like that. The song, while never released as a single, becomes a fan favorite, and as such, they start working on an instrumental demo for a song that was going to be called Metropolis Part 2, that was only ever intended to be an instrumental. Fans start hearing whispers about this new song roughly during the Derek Sherinian era, around the time of A Change of Seasons, and people start demanding this song be released. However, Dream Theater runs into a little bit of a problem, namely that the record label says, you are going to produce more hits for us. You will, you will produce more hits for us. You will work with professional songwriters to generate radio-friendly pop songs, and the result was Falling Into Infinity. Falling Into Infinity was a beautiful album with great music, but it is always, as always, still difficult to listen to because we all know how much Dream Theater resented having to make it. The band was at the brink of destruction because they had been forced into a creative hole that they didn't want to be in. The last tour for Falling Into Infinity was absolutely miserable, and they were seriously considering breaking up altogether, and even inquired about whether or not the record label would let them out of their contract. And for a progressive metal band to have a major label deal in the mid to late 90s was almost unheard of. So that really shows you how unhappy they were in that situation creatively. And the record label was the record label kept refusing to greenlight them because they were unimpressed with the sales of Falling Into Infinity. And finally, they said, "Look, whatever we put out, the fans will come see us live. Look at our shows; the fans always turn out. Dream Theater fundamentally is a live band." And so they got greenlit, and they got back creative control, and they capitalized on the existing interest in this existing song that was Metropolis Part 2, and they took that and expanded the whole thing into an entire album, which became, in my opinion, their greatest album of all time and the greatest album of all time. But you have to understand what was going on there at the time. Dream Theater was in a place where they were frustrated, their fans were frustrated because they were not able to get, the fans were not getting what they wanted. Dream Theater was not able to deliver what they wanted. And when they finally got the green light from the record label, the label just said, fine, do something, just get something out and we'll see what happens. They finally had that creative control back, and they said, okay, what is something that the fans are clamoring for? They've been clamoring for Metropolis Part 2. Let's capitalize, let's seize the day, let's give them exactly what they want. So what's different now, especially because we have, God knows we have all these people in the forums going, do you think it'll be Metropolis Part 3? I bet it'll be Metropolis Part 3. It'd be awesome if it was Metropolis Part 3. And, we found out that Nicholas and Victoria were actually the same person. And they, got the same therapist, the same actor that played the therapist in the live Seas from New York concert performance, even though he's probably dead now, and they brought him back, and they made an inflatable version of him, and they put him on stage, and, James LeBrie came out with, a big clock for the intro, the same kind of big clock that Flavor Flav used to wear. Wouldn't that be awesome, you guys? I think that'd be awesome. Wait, come back, and so as we get more and more of this inane crap about Metropolis Part 3, here's the thing. Metropolis Part 2 was 25 years ago. We are talking about, when Metropolis Part 2 came out, Dream Theater was still coasting on the vapor of their success from Pull Me Under. They managed by, Dream Theater and Tool were basically the only progressive metal bands that made it on MTV in the 90s. Dream Theater managed to get on MTV. They had a blow-up hit with Pull Me Under, and they got a little bit of attention for the video for Lie off of Awake. So they were actually on MTV, and they were still riding high. That success, that initial success that they were still coasting on, was less than a decade old. And the fandom for Dream Theater was by and large people in their 20s and early 30s. Okay, now that same fandom is middle-aged. And speaking for all of us, I can say we don't like being reminded that we're middle-aged. I still want to be part of the ongoing continuum of existence. I still want to participate in popular culture to some degree, even if people like Ice Spice make that increasingly difficult for me to do. But I still want to feel like I'm participating in this ongoing continuum that is the current trends and interests of popular music and all of that. And pulling out your fan favorite smash hit from 25 years ago and trying to capitalize on that. Again, we're not talking about capitalizing on buzz that was existing when that was going on in the fandom when the band was young and new and hip and exciting. We're talking about capitalizing, going back to a quarter-century old album, dragging that out, and making and trying to resurrect the corpse of this album. And that absolutely smacks of Dream Theater saying, fuck, we're tired old geezers now, and we need to, just bring back, what can we do to make ourselves sound, important again? It just sounds like the most cynical, most unnecessary career move they could possibly do. More so than that, though, where exactly would you take the story in Metropolis Part 3? I mean, we realize that it's left a little bit open-ended. The story is left a little open-ended at the end of the album that, somebody, possibly the therapist that hypnotized Nicholas at the beginning, is going to get revenge on him for is getting revenge for him exposing this legacy of political corruption that goes back, a century, almost a century, and that kind of thing. Somebody's getting revenge. We know that, but even so, the story itself is essentially over. You could go. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are places you could go somewhere with that. You could follow the person who killed Nicholas, and we do know it's a stabbing, by the way, because if you watch the video sequence at the end of Live Scenes from New York, the concert, and you freeze it at exactly the right time, you see the knife coming down. It goes by, it's blinking, you miss it, but you can freeze it and find it. So Nicholas is stabbed to death. So there's places you could go with that, but really, what would be a satisfying direction? Because, you could follow the guy that stabs Nicholas to death. We could follow Nicholas into the afterlife, that kind of thing. But as far as, remember, Nicholas is only an avatar for the story that happens with Victoria and, Victoria and the whole love triangle that happens there. What new perspective are we going to put on that? It would just be one of those things where they have to cobble together some new conflict to address in the sequel, just so that we can, do a reboot sequel. Another stroll down memory lane. Look, this is the most reboots have been what we call rebootquels now. The reboot sequels have been consistently the most unwelcome thing in popular culture. We've just did Indiana Jones 5 teach you nothing? That people are tired of this? They're tired of the member berries on South Park. I remember, remember that thing? I remember. So they're tired of this. People want something new and exciting and a new direction and a new idea to explore. So Metropolis Part 3 would just absolutely be a death knell for Dream Theater. I don't think they should do it now, should have done it now, and I don't think they should ever do it. I don't think they have a reason to do it. I would honestly, I honestly would be, put it this way, they're in a weird way. I'm not saying I want this, but in a weird way, I'd almost be more interested in the Astonishing Part 2 than Metropolis Part 3. Because you could, you could almost, it's almost just it's not so old that we all feel like geezers eating member berries, listening to it and everything. I want the journey that, I always, what I love about Dream Theater and about progressive music in general is I feel like, it's kind of like if pop music is, a good pop song feels like a tiny home. You've got everything you need for a comfortable little existence right there, but it's a tiny home. It's a single serving. Whereas progressive rock and progressive metal to me feels like living in a lavish palatial mansion that just goes on forever. And that feeling, that world is what I want to occupy. So let's go open some new doors and look in some new rooms in this fascinating castle that is the Dream Theater creative experience, rather than saying, hey guys, you want to go back in the drawing room? Remember 25 years ago when we were hanging out in the drawing room? That was really fun. Let's go back in the drawing room. No, let's go do something new. And for God's sake, people, come up with new things on the forums. And everybody, I did this too. I'm as guilty as everybody else. But God, can we stop doing this thing where we joke about how funny it would be to run all of the long Dream Theater album titles together? Hey, you guys, wouldn't it be great if the new Dream Theater album was called When Day and Dream Unite, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence on a Train of Thought that's driving past a dramatic turn of events depicted with images and words when infinity falls, or God, just whatever that thing is, guys, just Ugh, ugh. Dudes, I have OCD and I have to deal with rumination and unwanted thoughts, just the constant battery of the same thoughts in my head over and over again is just a hell that I struggle to regulate every day. Let's not recreate that hell on the Dream Theater forums. Thank you.